I don't know about you, but my head's spinning. There's quite a little bit of meat here to parse out, and we'll try and attempt a little of that. You do have an opportunity to get additional questions in. We're probably not going to get to all that we have, but I'd still love to have your questions. We'll do what we can with them as opportunity arises. One of the things that came up, it was actually part of Jim's talk, but I think it's really relevant to the panel as well, is that we've got a lot of folks in the room. They refer to themselves as gray hairs or something to that effect. I can't imagine why. And that that might limit some physical action. That was their premise. And so they were thinking about what can we do at home. And in the frame of the policy work, I'm pretty sure that a couple people here would have some ideas on that, as well as with the concept of prayer and church community.
So we're at a moment of great invitation because we can't stay, like, I'm a Democrat. I've been appointed in the Obama administration, so that's public, you know. But if I leave it up to the Democrats, to my party, to fix this, we're going to screw it up. Okay? This is a moment when we have to have everybody at the table. So in terms of equity, we can't just let the big industry at the table to define how we're going to solve this problem, because A, it's going to be very inequitable, and B, they can't do it fast enough. So we have to have everybody at the table. And so one of the things that we can all do, and particularly those of us who have reached the second half of our lives, is that we have social and political capital that we need to leverage. And we need to make sure that we're not just inviting fellow travelers that think like us, but how do we invite Democrats and Republicans together to figure this out? How do we figure out the public policy piece and the free market piece? Because we got to have both. And so there's a really powerful thing that we can do by changing the conversation about climate change from being this polarized political landscape to being climate action, where we're saying everybody has to be at the table and everybody has as part of the solution. And so part of the work we're doing with agriculture is that we're going out and inviting farmers to have a conversation about climate action. And we're starting with identifying farmers who can make a difference in terms of their political capital, and they happen to be Republicans mostly. And the conventional wisdom is that Republicans won't talk about climate action, and particularly farmers won't talk about climate action. But who's inviting them to that conversation? Nobody. They keep pushing them into the conventional wisdom of who they think they are. Like, well, Republican farmers will talk about climate adaptation, but they won't talk about climate action. Well, guess what? They do when you invite them into a space to have that conversation. So that, I think, is the most important thing that we all can do leaving this room, is to go back to our communities and expand the seats at the table to even some unconventional, don't just fall into the conventional wisdom, but take the risk. Use your put your political and your social capital on the line and try to create a bigger conversation. Take the risk. Have the courage that Jim was talking about.
The ability to engage with policy organizations like ours, who are up at the Capitol or up at the regulatory agencies, holding people's feet to the fire, and how you at home can engage with us. So we sent things out like legislative news bulletins during session about what's going on that's affecting the energy realm, the environmental realm. And we often send out action alerts on things like that allow you to directly email your legislator and let them know what you think about an issue. Because, I mean, it's a busy world. Things are getting thrown, as David knows, around every day. So it's difficult to track. Our organizations do that work for you and give you the mechanism to speak directly to your legislator. Or you can talk directly to your legislator. We often hold lobby days or days at the Capitol where people can come. But one of the most important things to do, I think, even if you don't take an action alert or you don't want to get involved with an organization like ours, is to speak to the person in power. Speak to your elected official at the county level, at the city level, your state legislator, because those are the folks that they listen to, their constituents. So it can't just be the environmental groups, the public policy groups, the activists, as they like to dub us, who have the ear. It has to be from a larger grassroots movement. It has to be someone they directly represent. That's who they listen to. And that's who's going to change the power dynamic. So I would just encourage you to figure out ways that you can get involved. Senate Study Bill 1036 right now is impacting the Office of Consumer Advocacy. The Office of Consumer Advocacy keeps the utilities, the monopolized utilities, in check. They represent the public and make sure that those policies protect customers, that utility policies protect customers. So those are the kinds of things that we need more people engaged on these issues to transform the power sector. So figure out ways that you can get involved with organizations like ours, or individually talk to the people in power who are making decisions. Because while policy isn't sexy, it matters.
And talk to the people in your families, in your communities. You hold so much wisdom, and we need to hear it. So tell us, what is it that you know that we don't from the years that you have lived and the experience that you have? If you're comfortable with social media, tell us there. Put your words out into the world. They matter.
One of the questions we have here is about the church buildings or houses of worship. And an EPA survey once estimates 5% of all commercial property space in the U.S. are among those houses of worship. So the question is, what are some of the opportunities for energy efficiency and renewable energy sources for church congregations to install? You talked about solar originally.
So, two things. One is that these buildings use power, they have budgets, so they're in the economy, and it's important to make decisions about that. And the second thing is that these are beacons. And so the investment is not just saving money or creating efficiency or using, putting together folks who can use the tax credit as an investment. Those are all important things, but it's important that congregations and denominations are doing the prophetic thing. And I think Jim talked a lot about that earlier. The other thing to remember is that we're moving into a future where the morally right thing to do is the economically smart thing to do. And we've got, as people of faith, we have to keep speaking that truth. Because if we don't speak that truth, the fossil fuel industry is going to continue to argue that this is going to cost too much. And that narrative is going to keep playing over and over. We have to break that narrative. So we have to say, we're doing this because it's the morally right thing to do. Oh, and by the way, economically, it's the smart thing to do. Because as a church, we don't like to waste a lot of money, because we'd like to put that money into our mission, and our mission isn't to pay the power company. Right? So framing things in ways that are prophetic, and also prophetic from a mission standpoint, but also prophetic as the economy is changing, because the economy is going to change. That we're either going to change into a future that's preferred and equity expands and we go into a future of abundance, or we're going to continue to go into a climate crisis where everything gets worse. The choice is not, is something going to happen? It's what's going to happen. And we do have that power, and churches have incredible power to change the narrative.
Just to follow up on that, first of all, Matt talked about himself being in the second half of his life. I think I'm in the third half. But it makes real good sense, because one of the reasons when the utility companies destroyed the energy efficiency program, they also tried to destroy the other things, solar power. They couldn't do it, and one of the reasons they couldn't do it was the pork producers. Pork producers have big buildings that have lots of places for solar panels to be on them, and they use a huge amount. That's one of the problems with them. Huge amount of electricity. Therefore, whether or not you want to have solar panels on your church, tell your legislature you might want to do that. And if enough people are saying, wait a minute, this is the wrong thing to do, getting rid of net metering is the next question, or the tax credit, either one. They'd love to do both. That's another argument. So I'm just trying to follow up on what Matt said, that even if you don't have any intention of doing it, pretend you are.
Really quickly, in addition to solar panels, you can choose to buy wind energy. You can put rain barrels out to catch the water off of your roof so that you're not using energy to cart treated water around to water your grounds. You can change your grounds into a food forest to grow food for your community instead of a lawn. You can weatherize your building, and you can invest your church's money in ethically responsible investments so that not only your physical but also your monetary is moving toward a good place with carbon.
So the last thing I just want to add is, one thing that I've seen mentioned elsewhere is, we've talked a lot about what we can physically do, but there's also a spiritual dimension to this. And what about taking an old faith practice of fasting and making an energy fast kind of event at your church to raise some awareness, to give a feeling of what it's like to not have that energy? Is that something that some churches might consider as a way to build empathy, to build kind of discipline?
And I'm going to ask Jim to go ahead and come on up here as we get a couple other questions.
You know, what would it be like if congregations were to engage policy? Now, just take a deep breath. I'm not talking about partisanship. I'm not talking about taking sides. I don't think there are sides in this, right, from what we've heard from these good panelists. What would it be like if 70 churches were to tell the utility company, you no longer have the authority to declare the end to net metering, because we won't cede that social, moral authority to you? What if 70 churches were to say that to your power company here? Now, all right, so that sounds all prophetic and edgy and all of that, but that day will come. That day will come when religious communities are manifesting that kind of witness in order to pivot the policies here in America. Let me just say one more very practical thing. It's interesting to think about all the wind that y'all have here. I don't know, do you have a battery program? Does your power utility company, for example, I'm now telling you what Vermont does. The Vermont utility company buys Tesla batteries and provides them for folks like me at 50% of the cost. And what's my benefit for paying half of what a Tesla battery costs and installing it in my house? My benefit is that when the power goes off, I continue to have power in my house. What's the power company's benefit? When the grid needs more energy, instead of having to buy it from someone else, they actually half own my battery. So they have the right to draw the power from what are now thousands of installed Tesla batteries in little old Vermont. Now, I'm not a pro like some of the engineers on this panel, but I know enough to know if you got a lot of wind energy here, you could really benefit from 100,000 or 500,000 batteries installed in all your homes and farms. And the two would complement one another. And why aren't the churches putting pressure on the power company to do what Vermont does? For example.
Grab a chair, go on up. So the couple of questions related to policy have come up, and then we'll move on to the philosophical. We've only got a few minutes, so we got to really give the high points, folks. But really, a lot of folks have been asking about the new Green Deal, or the Green New Deal, I think is the way it's actually phrased. And so they're kind of interested in, what do you think of the 10-year time frame? Just what about this Green New Deal? Does this make some sense? And let me kind of read between the lines here. I think we've got people in the room that are perhaps interested in taking some level of action, and they want to understand where to put their eggs. So we're giving them this great big smorgasbord of options and opportunity, but, and I know people have to make personal choices, but what's some level of priority from your perspective, policy-wise and church role-wise or faith-wise, that they could pursue? And maybe we'll kind of let everybody, and don't forget to mention the Green New Deal.
Follow your heart. There is so much to do. You can't do it all. So open up your heart. Make one life change, make one life change. And open your heart to that and let God then move you and follow it. So, there's going to be lots of policy opportunities, there's going to be lots of political opportunities. Pray it, open your heart, follow it. That's how you prioritize.
So, thanks for asking this question. This is a story a little like the one I told you about from when President Trump pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords. When I finally learned, as everybody in this room did, that on Thursday the Green New Deal would actually be in writing and available to us in a 14-page document from two congresspeople, I contacted John Dorhauer, the head of our denomination, and I said, how about the executive ministers of our denomination endorse the Green New Deal? He said, draft me something. You got 4 hours. That was better than 2 hours. So while they were announcing it in D.C., I actually did draft something, and by 6 p.m., the officers of our church signed it, and then on Friday, it was released through big press releases all over the country, and we're encouraging local pastors essentially to follow up on your question, and that is to write a local op-ed piece on the Green New Deal. Now, you guys were way ahead of that game because you arranged for me to write a little op-ed piece for the Des Moines Register, and in a tricky, anticipatory way, I wrote it on the Green New Deal. But I had no idea that actually by the time I would arrive, that the leaders of our denomination would have endorsed it. Already, I am in touch with leadership in the Presbyterian Church and in the Episcopal Church to endorse the Green New Deal. So, this is how change happens. This is how witnessing takes place. And I'll let others comment on your question.
My response is mostly about what resources we have in Iowa. What's really strange about Iowa is it could be the greenest state in the entire United States. We have vast reservoirs where carbon could be stored in our soils and our cities. We could have all sorts of forests within our cities because of the climate we have, because of the water we have. Water is going to be an increasingly scarce resource for some people. And so if I'm saying to people now, what do you invest in today to be a rock star 10, 15 years down the road? It's first of all, let's get a whole bunch of more trees around here. And second of all, let's make sure that our agricultural industry is able to adjust, have the incentives to adjust and rebuild the carbon soil that we've lost by their bad practices they've had for a long time. So those would be my priorities in any Green New Deal initiatives that I would like to see pushed forward, and especially led by Iowa. But let me just also emphasize, that's on the mitigation side. For Iowa in particular, and actually I've said this from Kansas City to Minneapolis, for the Midwest in general, where we can actually adapt the smartest is with our water. We're going to have it, other people aren't. And so, Gray's Lake, we should have like 24 Gray's Lakes around Des Moines, or in Ames. And it should be just a beautiful water haven around here, and that would attract people like you would not believe.
Can you do it in 10 years? 1942, we went from making automobiles to making airplanes. Ford went from making, engines for cars to making bomber planes. They did it in 8 months. Yeah, you can do it in 10 years, easy.
Iowa's energy composition, our rate of getting coal generation changed. From 2008, we got 70% 76%, I think it was, generation from coal. And in 2017, I think that number had dropped to 45%. So in 10 years, that's quite a jump. And if I could plead to anyone to do anything, I think it would be to hold your utility accountable for retiring coal plants. What's their plan to retire coal plants in the state in the next 10 years, and make sure that that's part of their long-term, rather short-term plan. Because in a state that has 37% wind energy and has seen that kind of drop in carbon sourced fuel in a decade, I think we certainly can, more than any other state, come close.
Akira, you're going to get the last word for the panel.
When I think about policy, I go maybe a little more philosophically. I think about, the majority of people who are crafting our policy are moving from a school of thought that has kind of gotten us into this mess in some ways, right? When most of our ancestors came over here from Europe and spread across the globe, they carried some ideas with them about how to interact with natural resources and the peoples they encountered that have created a system that has us in deep trouble. So when I think about policy, I think about lifting up the voices at the margins who maybe have some wisdom to share for us about how we might move forward in a different thought pattern, a different way of thinking. So I encourage you to listen to what Indigenous folks are saying about these policies. Take your cues from the people of color who have been most impacted by climate as to how we need to shift.
This is an outstanding panel. We are unfortunately way out of time. So before we give them one final round of applause, I would like the decision makers, the elected officials who have either since come in the room or were introduced earlier, if they would all please rise, because some new ones are here, and I know they would probably like to get to know that you know they're there. So thank you.
So I might not get everybody right, but Matt McCoy and Senator Selsey and Josh Mendelbaum, City Council member. Connie Boson, you were here earlier too, and Joe Olson.
I'm Cindy Valent, Polk SWCD Commissioner.
Great, Soil and Water Conservation District Commissioner. Anybody else? Make sure you're talking to these folks. That's why they're here. They want to listen to you. Give them an earful.